If you were to ask me how I would know that I was in Japan, I would tell you the smell of wood. The wood coming from the houses, the bridges, the raised platforms. At first, I couldn't place it, but then I realized just how distinctive this smell is. Already, I had learned about the importance of wood whilst in Umaji, and in this episode, I wanted to expand by focusing on the homes, buildings, architecture, furniture, things that for a long time in Japan were made out of wood, so integral parts of Japanese home life. Like Shikokumura, many open-air museums allow you to explore and visit traditional houses from the Edo period, so the 1600s to the 1800s, houses made out of wood. Examples of these are the Hidanosato Open Air Museum and the Toyama Municipal Folkcraft Village, which will feature in this episode. In most of these houses, you will find an irori, a traditional Japanese sunken hearth, which when lit would actually accentuate the smell of the wooden walls all around it. Meals were cooked around the irori, and it kept the houses warm in winter. By now, you might have guessed that I am a classicist at heart, and the hearth could not help but recall the goddess Hestia in Greek mythology, goddess of the hearth, but also the home, as that is what the hearth comes to symbolize. And so the hearth also seemed a good place around which to center stories focused on food, hospitality, gift-giving, and home life, which were and are centered around the fireplace and the core of the home. And the theme of home seemed appropriate to talk about because not only in this episode did I do 2 farm stays posted in a traditional house or farm with its local owners, but this episode will also focus on the time that I spent on Honshu, Japan's main island, which some people I spoke to did not even refer to as an island. This was simply the mainland. Speaking of food and cooking in Japan would not be right without centering on rice, gohan. This is one of the first words that the Duolingo owl haunts you with, and a word which I came to learn through many Google translated conversations is such a crucial part of a meal that it can be translated to mean food altogether. The story of My Lord Bag of Rice epitomizes this because it is the endless supply of rice which appears to grant Hidesato fortune at the end of the story. The seemingly omnipresence of rice might make it seem simple enough to be taken for granted, but as I learned these last few weeks, if you think rice is a simple, plain topic, think again. I recently listened to the audiobook of Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which gave some useful historical context and perspective, as well as actually helping me learn Japanese, while the Korean protagonists are also learning Japanese. In the earlier parts of the book, it became striking just how much rice in the pre- and post-war times was indeed a luxury. This food, which can now be seen in a variety of shapes and sizes in convenience stores, supermarkets, and restaurants across the country, so much so that you could easily take it for granted, was seen as the most precious thing and something to have for celebrations and special occasions. I delved into this topic especially in the first farm stay that I did with the MPO Sakaori Tanada in the village of Nakanoho, located in Ina City, Ina-shi, which I later learned actually just refers to the area around Ina rather than a city as we might know it. The MPO Sakaori Tanada looks after its namesake, 360 terraced rice fields situated between 400 and 600 meters above sea level, comprising of 14.2 hectares of land. They are 400 years old, and they are kept and farmed to this day, producing rice which the locals live off to. The MPO also organizes and deals with peoples and contracts in order to link them to the land. I stayed at Jinmokuse farmhouse with Yaeko-san and her husband Imae-san, who is a 13th-generation rice farmer. If you do the math, even with shorter generations, that means that his family has been farming rice for at least 300 years. They have 4 generations of their family living in the house. Thanks to Mamiko from the Sakaori Tanada MPO, I was able to speak to Imae-san and Yaeko-san with the help of Trevor, who also lives locally, but could translate between English and Japanese for me. I saw Sakaori Tanada the rice fields when I first arrived. The stone walls surrounding and supporting the base of each plot are estimated to have been built around 400 years ago, because the same architect who built Nagoya Castle oversaw their construction. I was told about the history of building these walls. The large stones in the walls are dug up from the ground, also to make room for the rice fields to be cultivated. Testament to the strength of this wall building is the fact that the walls have retained their shape from 400 years ago. There is no written account of the history of Sakaori Tanada. Instead, this is a living history handed down from generation to generation. 77% of Ina is forests, but only 10% of this is native. Most of it has been introduced for commercial reasons, growing cedars and cypress to sell them. When initially planting these trees, it was thought that their roots would help anchor the ground and prevent landslides. However, cedars have shallow roots, which actually put them at greater risk of being dragged down with landslides. In 2000, the area suffered a major landslide, and Imae-san and the other locals did not want their children and grandchildren to have to experience this in the future, so they set out to manage the forest for landslide prevention and sustainability, and that is how the MPO was born. The small size of the community led them to find sponsors to help them set up a sustainable system. Sponsors obtain from Sakaori Tanada contracts and collaboration agreements for the right to cultivate the rice fields, and they can regularly take water from the area for use in their factories. In turn, they work with the MPO to educate and engage local communities about forest upkeep and caretaking, necessary measures to ensure sustainable clean water use, output and reuse in the rice fields and nearby factories, and as a preemptive measure against landslides. Everything remains interconnected. MPO members are trained in the use of chainsaws for tree trimming, as well as other measures such as weeding and so forth, as the group goes out together to the forest. They run engagement events such as the one that I was able to attend, and we were meant to see in action the preemptive process of trimming trees and weeding and so on in the forest. But it was raining, so we did an indoor activity. Imae-san's generation of growers, in the years following the Second World War until the late 1980s and 90s, were able to live from rice farming completely due to the high cost of rice. This links back to rice being valued as an expensive and precious good. In the early post-war period, they would also rent out some of the rice fields to tenants and make money from this. However, now they have no more tenants, and it's very difficult to rent out the land for use. Changes, which led to governmental storing and redistributing of rice to the markets, lowered the price of rice so much so that they could no longer live off of rice production and selling anymore. The profit margins would not be high enough, as they would have to sell to the government, which would then redistribute in supermarkets for lower prices. This decrease in the price of rice has led to farmers not wanting to sell to the government anymore, in turn making rice harder to find in the market. Many rice shops started calling and dealing with the rice growers themselves. In the last year, the price of rice has shot up so much in Japan, and it was not just in Ina that I heard this, that it has reached almost wartime figures, mainly due to supply issues, lack of stock, poor harvest, and not having enough people to work the land. So much so that the government, for the first time, had to release 100,000 tons of rice back into the market because the price and demand had gone up so much. The exact figures are available on Japanese national websites. Of course, for Imae-san and other farmers, it is good if the current price of rice stays high, as they make a higher profit. This helped contextualize some of the interactions I had had so far. During my shukubo, the temple stay, a couple at the table did not touch their, very delicious bowls of rice. At the end of the meal, they showed this to an elderly Japanese lady who was, in all sense and purposes, flabbergasted and not very pleased. She was very happy with me when I showed them my empty bowl, though. Imae-san kindly explained the full rice harvest process. In October, following the previous year's harvest, the land needs to be fertilized and physically turned. Then, in the winter, it is left be. In April, the land is turned again, and the farmers fully cover the rice field with water. Then, they wait for a week and flatten the land, essentially making mud, which the rice is then planted in. A mini portion of this is what we were able to do at the local event that I attended. The planting process usually happens in May. The precise planting dates depend on the type of rice. Mid-May is normally a busy time. Imae-san said that he had planned to plant the rice on the day that I was staying at Shinmokuze, but the poor weather meant that he would do it the following day. Imae-san and Trevor explained that Thanks to machine work, the actual work of rice planting would take about a day. What takes time is growing the rice shoots, which are then planted. In the area, most fields are under administration by a local agricultural association, which grows the rice seeds into shoots and then brings them to the local farmers to plant. After the planting, it is imperative to root out any weeds and grass that would outgrow the rice, which is weak at the beginning. In fact, the shoots are very, very small. Some people still do this by hand, other people use weed killer. June and July are then the main times for the rice to root, and by the end of the rainy season, which is usually from early June to mid-July, the rice stalks should be tall, ensuring its survival. The rice fields which are filled with water in April are no longer refilled precisely because of the rainy season, and in August the water levels should be going down as they do not want the ground to be too soft or wet in early mid-September, otherwise the harvesting machines would sink into it. The harvest is normally complete by the end of September. Precise timelines also differ in their area because, as Imae-san explained, the local farmers have come together as a sort of cooperative, and they share the subsidies that the government gives them as rice growers to buy machines such as planters, harvesters, and so on, the use of which they then share amongst themselves. So, each farmer might harvest their field at a different time, borrowing the machines. The lack of profit in rice production has led their community to become, in a way, self-sufficient in the use of their rice, giving it to family and friends, selling to local businesses and consumers, but not putting it back to market. Nowadays, the whole rice planting process is done mainly by machine. By hand, it used to take weeks, and Imae-san's generation would learn and take up a trade, such as electrician, carpenter, and so on, so that they could be self-employed and divide their time between the weeks and periods that they would need to take care of the fields, and the more tranquil times, when they would anyways need an income. Machines came in the 1960s, and initially no one thought that you would be able to plant rice using machines. Bear in mind this was only about 15 to 20 years after the World War II loss. However, the larger machines, which enable them to do everything at a larger scale, only became more accessible around 20 years ago. When asked about the future of this agricultural work and production, the main concerns seemed to be the general aging population in rural areas. Imae-san said that his son, so the younger generation, did not want to be a rice farmer, but he had anyways asked him to stay local to Nakanoho so that he could at least help with the weeding and so on, and this seemed to be a regular dynamic. They explained that the farming would be something that people might take up, but only around 60 or so on, once they had retired from their careers. With the cooperative established by Imae-san's generation, it would now be possible for all the fields to be organically taken care of by one group of people. Many of the locals I had met at the event told me that they were taught at length about this process at school, and that the children are brought to do some rice planting as a school activity. I found this interesting because we have rice fields in Italy, if you think about how all of our risotto rice is made, but never once was I taught about this in school, and this kind of indicated the different cultural value placed on this food and the futurity of its cultivation. The theme of home intertwines also with the theme of spirituality from the previous episode, as during my time on Honshu, I visited Eryakuji Temple overlooking Lake Biwa from Mount Yei. A short ride from Kyoto, it seemed unfrequented by the masses of tourists crowding the Kyoto streets, but this temple, I was told, was actually one of the foremost homes and teaching places of the Buddhist faith. Buddhist priests in training would come here to study, with prefectural representatives being able to take up residence nearby, and leaders of the different strands of Buddhism had all visited this temple before setting up their individual schools of thought. So this also seemed as if a center, a gathering place, a hearth for Buddhism. Coming back to the rock walls, the old town below the temple, Sakamoto, still has older houses from the Edo period, which is where the Buddhist prefectural representatives would stay. These are surrounded by rock walls where the rock composition appears random, but is in fact not. A friend explained to me that the walls were built by stacking larger rocks together and then finding smaller rocks to fit in the gaps. These smaller rocks would create pockets within the wall to be used as cushions in case of an earthquake and allow space for the other rocks to move around but not fall. In Sakamoto, this process is called anozumi, building stone walls by simply piling stones in their natural, unprocessed form on top of one another, listening to where each stone should go. Testament to this is how the anozumi stone walls at Mount Yei were the only structures that remained fully intact even during the siege of Mount Yei in 1571. Japan is known to be a seismic country, having suffered many earthquakes throughout time. And in keeping with the theme of home life, it was very interesting to learn about how houses used to be built with respect to earthquake prevention and anticipation. That old Japanese houses do not have foundations. Instead, they were supported by large pillars placed in the center of the house, meaning that in case of an earthquake, the pillars would help hold the house up when it moved in the quake. Some of the houses that I saw in Toyama Folkcraft village had indeed a very high amount of pillars, leading all the way up to the ceiling for this support. Look, I am not an engineer, but I then read up about modern building techniques in Japan, and it seemed to me that the logic of using cushions to absorb and appropriately redistribute seismic shock, as well as letting the building move within an earthquake without collapsing, has still evolved and been adapted. Modern high-rises stand on bearing or shock absorbers, sometimes as simple as blocks of rubber, to resist the motions of the earthquake. Motion dampeners can also be positioned throughout the building, meaning that these will move and reduce the shake within the building, just like the pocket rocks would help the larger rocks absorb the shock and remain standing. Nevertheless, heavy roof tiles in the older houses would make these prone to collapse during earthquakes or heavy snowfalls, and so on, and the need to potentially build and rebuild homes following their collapse, or even burning, like in Arita town, was apparent. Rebuilding also seemed very common for temples. Many that I visited had the rebuilt in the year so-and-so, following a fire or a collapse, and so on. In fact, Ryakuji Temple was being refurbished when I visited it. This apparently needs to be done every 20 to 30 years due to it being made completely out of wood. Even the nails are made from bamboo, and the fact that the same traditional techniques are used in its maintenance. Weathering weakens it by nature, hence it needs restoration. The resilience and spirit behind the practice of picking up and rebuilding following a disaster or a loss, and preemptively creating buildings which would be easy to maintain and be rebuilt following said disasters really impressed me. I thought about what it would mean to know that you might lose your home and have to plan for that even as you built it. And it is interesting to also think about the survival and maintenance of these houses for social engagement and educational purposes, as takes place in these open-air museums, like Hidenosato and Toyama Folkcraft Village, and so on. Here, the old houses are not only looked after but celebrated, and, as was the case specifically in Toyama Folkcraft Village, you could visit a museum inside the house, but at the same time, you would be experiencing the setting of this house as another cultural experience. It physically contained the recent past, which should be learned about. Toyama Folkcraft Village, first set up in 1965, is comprised of 7 museums, 1 tea house, and 1 ceramic shop, mostly hosted in old farmhouses donated by local families. Some of the houses are in the gasho style, with a straw roof, kaya in Japanese. This is the same style of house found in the famous Shirakawa-go village in this same region. And the village's administrator joked that if I was short on time or Shirakawa-go was too busy, people could enjoy this historical type of house with greater calm in Toyama Folkcraft Village. Its contents range from archaeology, including objects found from excavations while the museum was being set up, but also folklore, crafts, ceramics, and so on. Many of the objects contained within the houses, especially those relating to agriculture, are real examples of tools that people would actually use in the Showa period from the mid-1920s to the late 1980s, and were donated also by local people. The ceramics on show also range from the Edo period to the contemporary, and were both donated and bought, this applying more to the more recent ones. The collection is curated with the aim to showcase objects used in daily life, bowls, cups, hot water bottles, water containers, and so on. The aim of the village is to preserve and utilize cultural properties from Toyama City, and to showcase and convey the history through these objects, which were and are significant to its residents within the buildings which used to be their homes. And so, if traditional houses are in fact the identity of a region, as Shikokumura wanted to convey, then perhaps Toyama Folkcraft Village presents the ID card, fingerprints, and also eye tests. It gives a living and an alive history and representation of the past pertinent to its local audience, which wants to be maintained for future generations. People working at the museum thought it to be well frequented, especially by school groups, with interest and engagement from visitors, and about 50,000 visitors per year, with more tourists now thanks to a mention in the New York Times of an ancient wooden backgammon set originating in Toyama. The notion of preserving houses definitely also has a touristic plus, with popular attractions in and around mainland Japanese cities being this village of Shirakawa-go, Kyoto and Kanazawa's samurai and geisha districts, Gion and Higashi and Nishi-chaya respectively, Takayama's Sanmachi-suji streets of traditional merchant houses, and the possibility to walk between the old towns of Magome and Tsumago following the Nakasendo Trail. You can follow Japan's oldest paved road, which used to connect Kyoto and Tokyo as one of 5 official travel routes established by the Tokugawa shogunate, the military government, in the Edo period to centralize and control communications and trade. In the story I inserted at the beginning, Hidesato helps the Dragon King with a quest, and is rewarded with gifts which he does not think himself worthy of. And I have to say, even though I have already mentioned the wonderful, generous, and welcoming spirit of all the people that I have spoken to, the overall amount of gift-giving, or giving in general, definitely positively surprised me. As an Italian, I thought I had a pretty clear idea about the rules of guests, hospitality, and gift-giving, which are important parts of our culture, but I was almost taken aback in Japan by the generosity of this custom. Already in the guest house I had stayed in near Kochi City, the host had invited us to her home to have fresh grilled bonito together, and this went way beyond what I would expect from just a normal stay. I also visited a family friend's house for lunch, and of course I had brought them gifts, but I was surprised when in turn they had gifts for me. This was almost a cultural reversal to what I was used to. And in the farm stays as well, the members of the family kept offering me presents, and it seemed simply to be because I was staying in their home. This kind of gift-giving and hospitality contributed to a feeling of warmth and kindness, even in contexts where communication, due to apparent language barriers, was difficult. With these gestures, it was clear that the host wanted you to feel welcomed and valued, and helped us connect and understand each other across cultural boundaries. This was definitely the case during my second farm stay at UNEHAUS in Nagaoka. Here, I was also able to see some Tanada rice fields, although more quiet and less well known. I also discussed similar issues as I had with Imae-san regarding issues tending the fields because there are not enough people to do so, but also it not being so easy for someone to take over a field to cultivate it. Funnily enough, I met a young Italian man who had moved to the area with his wife and was now starting rice field cultivation and a miso making business. He saw the importance of this work and wanted to keep it alive. He was learning from locals before they stopped working so that he could then carry it on. It seemed very interesting to me when thinking in terms of continuity and preservation of work that there was now an Italian man taking over very traditional Japanese work and businesses. But I think that's kind of the special thing about it, that there is recognition of their importance, so much so that even someone not from Japan wants to carry them on. I was also told multiple times that this region has apparently the most delicious kind of rice in Japan. This being due apparently to the high amount of snow that the region gets, about 4 to 5 meters in winter, which in turn means that there is more and better water, and the snow meaning that the land itself has better retention. Research has also been done at a geological level. The area of Tokyo, not the Tokyo you're thinking of, but this Tokyo, is an older mountain compared to its surroundings, which contributes to the fertility of the land. Even though I started with the focus on rice, this visit was not all about rice. Importantly, I learned about UNEHAUS, a cooperative founded in 2010 with about 9 full-time employees and 15 to 20 volunteers, a self-sustaining community where people can volunteer and receive help in return. For example, local elderly ladies help with the preparation of leaves and other produce for eating and use, and the group will drive them to the hospital, and so on and so forth. They especially are trying to provide work opportunities for elderly and disabled people to enable them to be outside more and to be more independent, but also to valorize older styles of agricultural work which would otherwise get lost. They want to create a space where people feel valued and welcomed for the work that they do from something beyond economic gain. It's not about the money, it's about what you do and drawing value from this act itself, where people feel like they give something to the community and the community gives back to them, that there is power in them coming together. Every day they eat together, volunteers, employees, maybe locals. They told me that usually it's about 18 people on average. Importantly, these are jobs that anyone can do. They change daily depending on what there needs to be done, and anyone can come and do them if they so wish. This is so that there is no barrier, including age, disability, and so on, to working there. But this is also done to attract people who might want to move away from the city into the countryside, also to counteract the population decrease which is happening in the countryside. Their efforts not only bridge gaps in accessibility and the loss of life in the countryside, but also generational ones, with younger people and the elderly working side by side. For example, what I did in terms of volunteer work consisted in going into the forest to forage for tree leaf plants, as well as other wild plants that are commonly eaten. Back at the house, we prepared these plants, so we separated the leaves from the rest of the branches. We washed them and left them out to dry for what will essentially make tea. Another type of plant that they cultivate and that we worked on is the plant used in the making of gin and other spirits. This plant will be purchased by a local brewery to make their spirits, and 2 employees from this brewery were also there prepping the leaves with us on the day. This was also an example of the circularity of their work. Thanks to Naya-san, who organized the whole stay program, we also visited the studio of a young local artist, Kaji, who makes life-size sculptures of animals and other fantastical creatures out of scrap wood materials. He started this work after learning about woodwork from his grandfather, who was a carpenter, and then wanting to do something with all the wooden materials that he saw going to waste but knew could be used. He described this feeling as mottainai. His works are locally sourced and based. He calls up local factories to use their wood, and, for example, for an exhibition in China, used Chinese wood and built the whole sculpture there. His studio smelled beautifully of wood and took me back to the introduction of this chapter, and the care and effort taken to upkeep traditional wooden houses, showing once again the value placed on this material, but also the desire to prolong its life and useful cultural value, which rely on the use of the hands. Overall, across both farm stays, and maybe my time in Japan so far, the most prevalent theme has been the decrease in population, especially in the countryside, due to an aging population and a move from the younger generations to the city. Here, at UNEHAUS, they seem to be working to bring life back to the countryside and mountain. And this seemed very fitting with the topic of hospitality, due to UNEHAUS welcoming people back to their local roots and places, as well as creating accessible and empowering work opportunities for anyone, forming a strong community and support network through work that is done together. Once again, they are trying to create conditions so that their past is not lost and that future generations can carry on this work. Coming to UNEHAUS felt really, really special, and I think that's also why it was central to the theme of hospitality, because it was a place where you could really feel the community spirit and the people coming together and the people wanting to help each other and look after each other and value the work that they did. The founder of UNEHAUS set up the organization following an earthquake in Nagaoka as he tried to find a way to help his community. It was interesting to see that both this organization and the Sakaori Tanada NPO were born following natural disasters and a desire to rebuild and restore the community. Thinking back to the necessary rebuilding and restoring of houses and temples, this again showed resilience and cooperation throughout ways of life and how society seemed to positively respond, drawing closer together and wanting to make change following these disasters. I said that this chapter would be about the hearth, the home, hospitality, and what better way to convey this through shared cooking experiences during these days. At Jinmokuse, we made sushi and gohemochi made out of squashed rice grains shaped into kind of long ovals, then grilled on a hot plate or coals, brushed with the most delicious soy, sugar, miso, nut sauce. In relation to this, Yaeko-san told us a folktale about a Japanese goblin, a tengu, who lived on Kasagi Mountain, which is near Nakanoho, who would steal gohemochi from those who brought it as a picnic snack when hiking up the mountain because it was that tasty. At UNEHAUS, in terms of cooking, I was given a small tempura masterclass, as well as told about all the local specialties. This is one thing that I'm learning more and more about Japan, is how each place, no matter how small, has its particular delicacy and local produce. What I found super interesting was the culture here of foraging and eating off the land and in connection with the land. This was also the case for Yaeko-san in Jinmokuse. So it seemed that overall, the local people here had a greater awareness of what could be eaten from nature and greater respect for picking and preparing it, championing what was local to them.
そうだよね。めんどくさいよね。
難しいですね。
Yaeko-san described how often Japanese guests, especially who come to Jinmokuse, find it a restorative place, which takes them back to a different time, and being in the countryside helps them reset from the loudness of the city. So, in a way, this could be seen as a homecoming of sorts, a welcoming of the spirit to a time it used to belong to. And so, this made me feel, when centering this chapter around the topic of home, which I know might seem weird because why make a chapter about home when I am so far away from my own home, that this feeling of homecoming to a different place and time could apply to me as well, because it is not necessarily about my physical home, it is about a feeling of home. Focusing on a feeling of home, hearth, hospitality was a way, I think, to also counteract initial feelings of being lost and overwhelmed so far from home and in different settings, and to reflect on how sometimes we can still feel at home when very far, or have instances which bring us even closer. For example, meeting the elderly ladies at UNEHAUS made me value my time with my own grandparents more, as well as being in the countryside or in the mountains, making me think of my time in the Italian countryside and mountains, and how much you can learn and put into perspective from a different but still similar context. And perhaps it's also interesting to think about how the Japanese countryside and way of work can sometimes be appreciated more by Italians than the Japanese, such as maybe the Japanese appreciate Italy more. It was a real thinking point on whose grass is really greener and how and why we might call a place our home.